If you're a manager, you need to remember that people don't work for you. People work with you. Part of your job is to get them what they need to do their best work. And that's especially true for high performers. Hey leader, David Burkus here, organizational psychologist and author of 4 best-selling books on helping leaders and teams do their best work ever, including helping leaders help high performers do their best work ever. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. High performers really do create more value than everyday average level performers. One notable study in personnel psychology found that high performing employees are 4x times more productive than their average counterparts. Now, contrary to popular belief, when you're managing high performers on your team, it doesn't mean that you can just let those people do whatever they want. It doesn't mean you let them fly solo. Hey, you're a high performer, so here you go, here's the keys, you drive. It does mean you have to do things a little bit differently. Your role shifts from one who is setting and tracking objectives and holding people accountable to a more supportive servant leadership role. There's a couple key areas where that comes into play. And in this episode, we're gonna break those down, the tools you need, the tactics you need to implement to manage high performers, keep them motivated, engaged, and doing their best work ever. The first tactic to manage high performers is to give expectations clearly. High performers want to know how the score will be kept. They want to know what their objectives are. They want to know what their goals are. There's a lot of research that shows obvious things, like the fact that when you set a goal, you're immediately more likely to achieve the goal than had you not set it. And so high performers want their goals to be a bit higher so that they're a bit more motivated to achieve a bit more. But it's not just production goals. It's also other expectations you might have. High performers need to know what the expectations are for how they support the team. So for example, if there's an expectation that they need to be at meetings at the same time and as active in said meetings than other members of the team, you as a leader need to make that expectation clear. Tell them how they're going to be scored, and then you can let them perform, but only if you give them expectations clearly. The next tactic to managing high performers is to offer autonomy openly. We know that autonomy, the ability to determine where you do the work, when you do the work, how you do the work, is a huge driver of motivation for all employees, but especially true for high performers because, let's just be a little honest. In reality, some of your high performers may know how to do their job better than you do as their manager, right? Sometimes high performers get promoted into management roles, and then you could rely on the manager knowing how to do it better. But even then, if the landscape changes, if we're 5, 10, 15 years down the road from when you've been doing that person's job, the situation has changed, the landscape has changed, the environment has changed, and so those high performers really do know how to do it better. And so you don't want to be seen as being a micromanager to those people. You want to demonstrate trust by giving them that autonomy and let them do it. Now, you can set some guide rails. You can tackle this however you want, but we do have these expectations. That goes back, to step 1, to tactic number 1. But you do need to give them a little bit more freedom to determine it. And by the way, when this happens, other members of your team, maybe who haven't demonstrated high performance, may want that level of autonomy as well. And this is a great opportunity to use autonomy as a performance incentive for those people. Ideally, you lead an entire team of high performers and you give them a lot of autonomy. But not everybody's there yet, but it's great to see autonomy as a reward. Give them a little bit of autonomy and then let them know that as their performance grows, you'll give them even more. The next step to managing high performers is to adjust their workload accordingly. This is perhaps the most dangerous territory for being the direct manager, the direct supervisor, the servant leader of a high-performing employee. And that is that when we have employees who do good work, when we have people on our team who consistently perform well, we have a temptation to give them more and more things to do. It's a perfectly rational temptation. And in fact, depending on the size of the organization, you may have other leaders in other departments being tempted to bring those high performers in to their focus groups, to their task force, to their committees. And it's your job as their direct supervisor to protect their workload, to manage their capacity. We actually want to push back on this temptation to give good people more and more work. Why? Because 1, we don't want to burn them out, but 2, if we're giving them more and more work and it doesn't play to their strengths and the things that have made them a high performer, it actually runs the risk of doing damage to their career, right? The worst thing in the world would be to overload a high performer with tasks that don't play to her strengths and then have her fail that and be seen as a less than. right? As a used to be, as someone who is no longer a high performer. So protect the workload. You can give them more tasks if you believe they can handle it, but make sure you're managing that capacity both to protect burnout and to protect their reputation in the organization. The fourth tactic to managing high-performing employees is to talk development frequently. Talk about the progress that they're making in their career. You want to be known to that high performer as the leader that really took an interest in their career. So talk development frequently. Talk about what their developmental needs are. This means you might need to have an open and honest conversation, one that doesn't get documented in the annual performance review, for example. An open and honest conversation about what they want to do in their career. That might be that they want to stay in this role forever, right? Maybe they're a high-performing sales employee and they love being with clients. Or maybe they're a frontline physician or nurse and they love treating patients. The worst thing in the world you could do is let the organization promote them out of those roles. But that is where organizational inertia and the only having one corporate ladder to climb will lead them. So it becomes your job to protect that, right? It becomes your job to know what they want. You want to know as much as they know about their career, and you want to give them the developmental opportunities, especially if the opposite is true. If they do want to get into a management role, then you want to be able to identify what skills they need to demonstrate, what accomplishments they need to have on their resume so that they can prove themselves in that interview for that management role. Yeah, that's their job primarily, but you, as their servant leader, as the person who's directly responsible for them, you need to be their number two in terms of championing their development in the organization and even outside of it. The fifth tactic for managing high performers is to give feedback regularly. And this one goes kind of right along with the idea of talking about development frequently. These are regular conversations you need to have. High performers love feedback, positive and negative. Yes, when they accomplish stuff, even if it feels like, oh, they're winning so much, I'm getting tired of them winning. Even if that happens, you want to make sure that you're taking the time to praise them. But high performers can handle constructive feedback as well. So when the time comes to give them that specific feedback, don't document it and wait for some monthly check-in or quarterly or annual review. Make sure you give them feedback in the moment or as close to the moment as possible. Make sure you make it a regular habit. Their line will be more open to that feedback and more open to how to use that feedback to get better than your average employee. So make sure that you're doing feedback conversations on a much more regular schedule than perhaps the rest of your team. And the sixth and final tactic for managing high-performing employees, and this may be the last thing you want to do after the end of that feedback conversation, is to promote purpose pro-socially. Most organizations, especially in the time we live in now, understand the motivating power of purpose. You can't work for an organization that doesn't have some version of a mission statement, or at least can point to some fancy document, some plaque in the corporate lobby, or some paragraph on the front of their 10K and say, this is why we do what we do, right? We know that. Most organizations and most leaders have gotten that idea. But most of what motivates people in the day-to-day isn't that grandiose, high-level mission statement. It's knowing who benefits from the work that you do. And that's especially important for high-performing employees to help them stay connected to the rest of the organization. One of the most toxic things that can happen for high-performing employees is to be consistently performing well, to believe they're better than the organization, better than the rest of the team, and then get disconnected from the whole organization. You can actually have a situation where that star player is dragging the rest of your team down. So we want to talk about pro-social motivation here. Who is helped by the work that that person does? And we want to talk about it often, right? We want to do this not only to motivate them, but also to remind them that they're connected to a larger team, they serve that larger team, and they serve that larger organization. And when they do their best work, it makes everybody better. So we're inspiring here, but we're also reminding them that the team is just as important. We value their talent tremendously, but we value it because of the way it creates value for the whole team, because that's how we actually win consistently as an organization. And you will only do that if you start translating the grandiose purpose, the big why, and turn it into a specific who for your high performers and maybe even for your whole team. Now, if you're thinking about this list, we covered 6 different tactics for managing high-performing employees, and at least half of them, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't that how you manage all of your employees? Well, it should be. Because a lot of research, decades of research into organizational psychology suggest that if you manage this way, if you take on the role of a servant leader or a coach, you will help improve most people's work. You'll make your high performers' work even better, but you'll help your regular performers turn into high performers as well. So take note of these and begin to practice them on just about everyone on your team, and you'll help everyone on your team turn into high performers. You'll take everybody on your team and hopefully help them do their best work ever. Oh, one more thing. If that final point about promoting purpose prosocially really resonated with you, it's probably because you're thinking about ways to motivate your high performers in addition to just manage them. So you're going to check out this video here on how to motivate high performing employees. This one. You're probably already motivated to watch it. So click it.